The world was created by three gods, the embodiment of good, balance, and evil infusing Gielinor with their combined powers, or so we are told. But the truth is so much more complicated than that. Most of this world's history has been a multi-way tug-of-war between those we call deities. Most mortals worship and dedicate their lives to at least one of them. Yet what do we actually know about these divine beings? The truth is that the modern ideas of godly benevolence and moral superiority quickly fall apart under scrutiny, and there are none more blind to this reality than the very people meant to guide us through religious matters. So today, let us take a step back from Gielinor's mainstream religious narratives and examine the history, powers, and limits of the entities who shaped this land over thousands of years, and see if we can answer this one very loaded question. What really are the gods of Gielinor? The first thing to understand is that gods are not a constant presence on Gielinor. They come and go between it and other planes of existence. Some of them ascend to godhood, some of them perish. While today most humans only ever utter the name of three gods, there were once many more gracing this world with their presence, and even today there are several regions with their own pantheons. Most adventurers have at least heard many deities' names in passing, but have limited knowledge of them. Allow me to introduce most of the known gods that have, at one point or another, affected the course of Gielinor's history. First, getting to know these beings will make it easier to explore other topics relating to godhood later. I will try to go over the gods themselves and mostly leave out what their followers have done in their names. Also bear in mind that evidence for ancient events is rare and lacking, especially when it comes to the First and Second Ages, and there may be inaccuracies in the information that did survive to this day. Saradomin, god of order and wisdom, is said to have first arrived on Gielinor during the Second Age, along with the Icene race. His influence seems to have spread quickly among humans, although at the time they were a fairly weak race. Indeed, today, he is still humanity's main deity, and his church is arguably the most influential religious group in the world. His modern image is that of a benevolent god whose righteous light guides humanity towards morality and greatness. Yet, this version of Saradomin is at best overly simplistic, and at worst thoroughly whitewashed, for it hides truths darker than his church would care to admit. Historically, he has not been shy about shedding blood to spread his influence, sending unimaginable numbers of his own followers to the meat grinder of the god wars during the Third Age. Far from being a victim of the wars or just an actor on its periphery, he was undoubtedly one of its most active participants, spending many thousands of years fighting off the forces of Zamorak and systematically eradicating every trace of the Zarosian Empire that came into contact with his followers. When the God Wars ended and the dust settled, Saradomin was arguably one of its greatest winners. Despite being forced out of Gielinor by Guthix, he was by then humanity's main god, and so as humans began to slowly grow from near extinction to world power, his influence grew with them. Indeed, humans are now the most dominant species on Gielinor, making Saradomin the main god of the Fifth Age, although his worship comes in many forms. The Church of Saradomin may be the main religion, but even groups such as the Ham sect claim to act in his name and seemingly get some of his blessings. Guthix, god of balance and nature, was the one to originally discover Gielinor. Back then, it was a potent but completely empty land, kinda like starting a new project in Gary's mod. During the First Age, he convinced many races to travel there with him and populate this newfound world, and possibly created many others along the way. Among the first populations he guided to Gielinor were humans and elves. He is said to have helped the early societies thrive and evolve, but by the end of the First Age, he had fallen into a deep slumber that would last for millennia, marking the start of the Second Age, during which many new gods traveled to Gielinor and sought to carve themselves a piece of the pie. Soon enough, the market became saturated, so to speak, and the only way to expand one's influence was through violence and conquest. This would lead to the Third Age, also known as the God Wars. As the name implies, this 4,000 years long era was defined by constant warfare, which left the world utterly devastated. You can find a 1.5-hour documentary on this very topic on this channel if you want to know more. The destruction was so great that it woke Guthix up, and when he emerged on the surface to witness what the other gods had done with his beloved world, he was absolutely furious. He banished all the gods from Gielinor and established the Edicts of Guthix, which dictate that should the balance of the world be upset once more, he would personally reshape it into his perfect idea of balance, no matter what it took. Basically, he told the other gods that if they couldn't be trusted to share their toys, then nobody would have them and they'd all be grounded. Once those responsible for the world's destruction were out of the picture, Guthix returned underground and fell into a second protracted slumber, one still ongoing to this day, over 2,000 years after the God Wars. Although many Guthixian races were wiped out during the Third Age, he is still worshipped today by a large variety of species, groups, and individuals, including many humans. Even among those who pray to other deities, he commands great respect and fear, and even the most devoted Saradominists refuse to break the edicts of Guthix, unwilling to risk incurring nature's wrath. Zamorak, god of chaos and destruction, once served under a different god long ago during the Second Age, Zaros. He was not a god at the time, but a still extremely powerful Majorat. Driven by personal ambition and thirst for power, he betrayed his master and killed him, a decision that ranks among the most pivotal events in Gielinor's entire history. Using great relics of power, he not only killed Zaros, but also managed to steal his godly powers for himself. This action had within days sparked the God Wars and ushered in the dawn of the Third Age. He was banished from the land by other gods after his unthinkable assassination of one of their own, but returned 7 years later with more armies recruited from other worlds, ready to lead them and those already loyal to him through history's bloodiest chapter. He spent the next 4,000 years waging war, his main goals being to overpower his new main rival Saradomin and the extermination of everything and anything related to his old deity, Zaros. Not only did his actions kickstart the Third Age, they also led to its conclusion. After millennia, he was growing too powerful for any one god to handle, and so a tenuous alliance was formed among his enemies, whose armies cornered him in his conquered province of Forenthry. Unwilling to give up, he cast a spell of unimaginable power that devastated almost the entire northern part of the mainland and wiped out both his and his enemies' armies. This cruel, unmitigated assault on life itself achieved something even the unbelievable destruction of the previous thousands of years failed to do. It pulled Guthix from his slumber, resulting in the Edicts of Guthix being imposed on the world. Today, Zamorak still has a large following, although his influence on humanity is limited, as his disciples tend to be pushed into the shadows due to the Zamorakian religious customs being incompatible with Saradominist ideas of morality. Zamorak worshippers, in contrast, tend to seek power at all cost and don't hesitate to leverage chaos and destruction as weapons to obtain whatever they want from others. They scheme in dark places and strike with overwhelming force when they believe the time is right to seize what they want, mirroring the methods employed by their god eons ago to bring history's largest empire to its knees. Zaros, ancient god of darkness and today often known as the Empty Lord, is a deity whose legacy has been almost completely forgotten. Yet, he is anything but a historical footnote. His power was once feared even among other gods, and during the Second Age he led an empire that soon became the largest realm to ever exist on Gielinor. Indeed, the Second Age is also known as the Golden Age of Zaros, as his domain was far greater in size and might than any modern kingdom. This ancient being sought to impose his will upon the whole world, ruling from his capital Sentistan, itself arguably history's greatest city at its peak. Its only possible rival for the title being Prifthynnis, the grand city of the elven race. Yet today, all that remains of it is found here in the dig site. As mentioned earlier, he was betrayed by his greatest general, Zamorak, who plotted his demise and usurped much of his realm and power. It seems that Armadyl, the god of justice and law, was never that big of a player in Gielinor affairs, but he is still remembered today due to his participation in the God War's alliance against Zamorak that led to the God Sword's creation. It's not even certain where he and his followers were based, although the limited evidence we have points to parts of modern-day Kendron and/or Gielinor's skies. We know he ruled during the Third Age from a location called the Empyrean Citadel, suggesting his headquarters were indeed somewhere high up, on top of the only known species associated with him being the flying avian seas. Both his influence and followers almost completely vanished from this world after the God Wars, however, their only remaining traces being found in the recently thawed God Wars dungeon and in the Temple of Ikov, where an ancient order he founded still exists, the Guardians of Armadyl. The relic used by Zamorak to usurp Zaros' power was a powerful staff that Armadyl claimed for himself after the Empty Lord's downfall and the temporary banishment of his betrayer. Thus, its modern name, the Staff of Armadyl, which the Guardians of Armadyl were founded to protect. It's unknown what the staff was known as before Armadyl claimed it. Despite his values ostensibly being similar to that of Saradomin's, there was clearly little love between the two, as it seems they only ever allied in order to stand a chance against Zamorak's superior power, and that alliance quickly broke down in the God War's dungeon, with Saradomin's troops even stealing one of Armadyl's greatest treasures, his eponymous crossbow. If you were wondering why it's dropped by Commander Ziliana rather than Kriara, there's the reason. Bandos is the god of war, and seemingly a complete psychopath. We know he once traveled to the world of Ubiusk, where he met many species with limited cognitive abilities. Bandos was something of a war addict, and so he thought they would make for the perfect followers, soldiers he could send endlessly against his enemies without them having the capacity to question him. He imposed his rules on the creatures of Ubiusk and took them to Gielinor, including goblins, ogres, and orcs. Their lives were forever changed from a peaceful existence to unending war fighting under the command of their new god. Bandos and his minions settled in and around the Feldip Hills, where many of the stronger ones of his followers still dwell today, at least those who survived the God Wars without going extinct. One conspicuous exception is the goblins. After Bandos was banished by Guthix, the societies he left behind fell apart without his leadership, and infighting resulted in the goblins, the weaker of his followers, being driven away to survive, hence their presence in many other parts of the world today. The surface goblins still worship their god, having been drilled into never thinking for themselves, and still follow Bandos' original 4 commandments, which should tell you everything you need to know about his philosophy. Not to run from battle, cowards must die. Not to show mercy, merciful must die. Not to doubt big high war god, doubters must die. Not to make own plans, thinkers must die. Yeah, Bandos was basically a terrorist cult leader. Seren, crystalline goddess of harmony and light, was apparently created by another powerful goddess along with her brother, although her precise origins and family are veiled in mystery. She eventually left her homeworld, and her interdimensional travels took her to Tardiad, where she fell in love with one of its species, the Elves, who likewise happily adopted her as their goddess. She became their guiding light, animated by an undescribable sense of purpose in seeing the elves grow and evolve. However, she grew increasingly devastated as she witnessed more of them grow older and pass away. Wishing to do something about their tragically short lifespan, she found a way to transfer a tiny part of her essence into every elf during a ritual now known as the Song of Creation. This gift drastically extended their lives, but in return bound their existence to her own, leading to their suffering and even death if she remained too far away from them for too long. One day, another divine being, almost certainly Guthix, visited Tardiad and told Seren of Gielinor, describing it as a perfect world filled with power. Seren took a gamble and traveled there, leading most of the elven race alongside her in the hope that this new land's power could free their species from the curse she inadvertently put upon them. They arrived during the First Age, and with Seren's guidance built their great city of Briffinus, the oldest city to still stand today. Seren was indeed impressed by the power Gielinor contained, and under the city she eventually found the Death Altar. She believed the altar's power could be exactly what she sought, a perfect counter to her own light essence that could potentially lift the elves' curse. She tried creating a fragment of herself to bind the elves to that would be perfectly balanced and free them, but failed and instead created a dark fragment that she ultimately had to seal away. During the God Wars, she was one of the rare deities with no desire to join the bloodletting. Fortunately for her, the Galarpos Mountains physically isolated her people from the rest of the mainland, and the elves fared arguably better than any other species during the Third Age, hiding away behind the crystalline walls of their capital for almost its entire duration. Yet, when Guthix awoke and put an end to the slaughter by banishing the gods, he made no exception for Seren and her peaceful intentions. The goddess had to go. But if she left the elves behind, they would all perish to the curse she had been unable to lift for all these millennia. In the end, Seren found this idea too unbearable to stomach. She shattered her crystalline form into millions of tiny crystals so that the species she had dedicated her life to could forever be bound to what was left of her, thus choosing her own death over that of the elves. All those ubiquitous crystals in Tiranon are tiny remains of the goddess that once guided the elves, and a few among them are even skilled enough to sing those crystals into incredible weapons and tools, a ritual akin to a much lesser version of their goddess's song of creation. The Kingdom of Valamor practices its own isolated religion called Lozanium, which worships two different gods. The first and main one being Ralos, god of the sun. We do not know that much about Lozanium and Ralos himself, but his holy book claims that he was born from a massive burst of light before the world even existed. His followers believe he requires blood to be spilled in order to sustain his power. In the past, this was achieved through ritualistic sacrifices atop the Fortis cliffs, but today these religious offerings are now done through the Fortis Colosseum, which doubles as both a massively popular form of entertainment in the kingdom and a religious site. Few have even heard of Ralos outside of Valamor. Even Juna, the extremely knowledgeable guardian of the Tears of Guthix, admits having never heard of him. Lozanium's second deity is Ranul, god of knowledge and the moon. While part of the same religion as his brother Ralos, his following is much smaller, perhaps due to the philosophy associated with him being less relatable and attractive. His dedicated followers believe that the only two significant events in an individual's life are birth and death, and that one should view the latter with respect rather than fear. Ranul is said to guide the deceased to the afterlife, known to Lozanium followers as the Gates of Mictal. His holy book also states Ranul's belief in the importance of knowledge and discovery, but also in the wisdom of keeping said discoveries secret when they represent a risk to the lives and well-being of others. The undead druids in the Forthos dungeon are ancient followers of Ranul, who were long ago corrupted by an entity only referred to as a dark wizard, who instilled among them a twisted interpretation of Ranul's teachings, making them undead and driving them to fanatically attempt to bring others to their own deaths faster. There is some limited evidence suggesting that Ralos and Ranul have long been dead, but that is a story for another time. Oh, and if you're having a hard time recalling which god is which, by the way, just remember their names are respectively solar and lunar backwards. Very subtle and clever, I know. Back on the mainland, the people of the Caridian Desert have long worshipped their own set of deities. At the top of the hierarchy is Tumeken, god of the sun and light. Precious little is known about him, but his power was clearly great, as during the Second Age the Zarosian Empire tried to subjugate the Menophites during what is known as the Caridian-Zarosian War. Tumeken, knowing his followers stood at a great disadvantage, tried to tilt the scale in any way he could. He created weapons of incredible power, including Tumeken's shadow and the magical automatons known as the Wardens. Tumeken is believed to be dead, having sacrificed his own life when it became clear the Menophites were on the brink of defeat by detonating himself, triggering an immense explosion that wiped out the invading Zarosian forces, although many of his own warriors also perished in the event. His wife Elidinis is the goddess of fertility and growth and is closely associated with the river Elid, which derives its name from hers. The few stories we have of her paint a picture of a benevolent goddess with little desire for violence and conflict. The village of Narda, for instance, was founded when Elidinis gave a statuette bearing her own image to a refugee of the god wars named Nardarine. She was on the verge of death at the hand of the cruel desert conditions. In return for food, water, and the statuette, she only asked for the woman's loyalty. There is also a legend claiming that Elidinis once brought the very waters of the Elid to a desert flax farm that was hit by a severe drought. The very first spool of thread produced from the revived crops was the blessed thread of Elidinis, a legendary spool of thread that never runs out, and eventually somehow found its way to Pharaoh Osmumten himself, as it is now located in his tomb. The entities we've explored so far are near universally agreed to be true gods, but there are many more whose godhood are often considered lesser or dubious for various reasons. For example, the Menophite pantheon also boasts of two entities seen as demigods, Icthlorin and his sister Amascut, created from the essence of Tumeken and Elidinis. While their roles and powers were definitely closer to that of the gods than to most mortals, they were undeniably lesser than their creators. Tumeken would also create a lesser pantheon by bringing into existence 4 avatars, allegedly over the course of 4 dreams, and infusing them with some of his power. Besides their clearly inferior powers compared to Tumeken and Elidinis, the 2 siblings and 4 avatars are seen as demigods because they were not banished from Gielinor through the edicts of Guthix, implying the deity himself did not consider them gods. But there is a long list of other beings of questionable divinity. The legendary Fremennik hero only remembered as V was said to have once touched an artifact of incredible power, the Stone of Jas, and afterwards developed abilities so great that his fellow Fremennik began worshipping him as a god, although he himself did not consider having ascended to godhood and preferred being seen as a hero instead. Monkeys have their own patron deity, Marimbo, which we know basically nothing about besides her name. Various Karamja tribes worship gods whose specifics and even names are unknown. Even cabbages are said to have their own patron deity, Brassica Prime, who also boasts a tiny but very dedicated human following, the mysterious Brassican mages. The mountain tribe fear a so-called god of the mountain referred to as the Candle. There is a dark cult hiding deep under the Galarpos mountains who worship an evil mage and self-declared son of Zamorak, Iban, seeing him as a god. Another cult, this one living in the muddy southern tip of Tiranon, believe the dragonkin creation dwelling in the nearby poison waste to be a god, regularly sacrificing their own people to Zulra in religious rituals. The Vitter vampiric clan worship the founder of their house and original owner of the Scythe of Vitter as their god. Many people have worshipped Great Corin's mad dictator mage Xeric as a god, as well as his high priest Vazan Mysterio, a mysterious magical evil chicken, a former human hero turned feline, and even a gnome child for some reason. And hopefully by now you're starting to understand the first issue in trying to figure out what the gods are. What even defines a god, as opposed to a demigod, an unexplained phenomenon, or even just a dude with a big ego? Let's see if we can make sense of it all by scrutinizing the common elements among the entities generally agreed to be indeed gods. First of all, the gods seem to universally have a physical form, rather than being omnipresent. For example, we're told Zamorak unleashed a devastating spell that created the wilderness as a last resort when enemy armies cornered him. Most historians and theologians alike often use phrases such as "a time when gods walked the land" to refer to the eras predating the edicts of Guthix, who himself would have no reason to banish gods who weren't really there per se. Interestingly though, I have a strong feeling that the common depictions of humanity's three main gods as humans was born of either artistic interpretation or historical revisionism. Zamorak was a Majorat, a powerful species with shape-shifting abilities whose members sometimes do adopt a human form, but their normal form appears to be that of a skeletal humanoid. It's not impossible that Guthix may have had a human form, since he brought humanity to Gielinor in the first place, and therefore had at least some kind of relationship with them even before the First Age, but that seems unlikely to me. As for Saradomin, I find it extremely hard to believe he would have had a human form. He originally came to Gielinor alongside the Icens, who settled east of the mainland and created the Kingdom of Hallowvale in today's Mauritania. Hallowvale was also home to many humans, and while there is ample evidence that they were at least very well tolerated, they were still treated as second-class citizens there. When Nefertiti Hallow, the Queen of Hallowvale, took a human as her husband, it was something almost completely unheard of in the realm's history, to the point of almost being scandalous. If Saradomin had a human form all along, it would be extremely odd for his most loyal followers to look down upon the species with the same form as their god. There are two theories that make the most sense to me when it comes to the depiction of Saradomin as a human. Perhaps humanity simply forgot what their main deity really looked like. After all, dozens of generations of humans have come and gone since the edicts of Guthix. However, my second theory seems both more likely and more interesting to me. Even before Saradomin was banished from Gielinor, he had formed religious order which survived to this day. I find it hard to believe, for example, that the Church of Saradomin and the Temple Knights both either failed to keep records of their god's appearance, or lost all traces of those records at some point. But here's a more insidious idea. After the fall of Hallowvale, Saradomin's main source of followers, manpower and influence was most likely humanity. It's possible Saradomin himself decided to rebrand his image and begin using the likeness of a human to help ingratiate himself to the race who now formed most of his power base. For legal reasons, this is just a theory. The Church of Saradomin has deep pockets and very good lawyers, so this is all alleged. By now, I'm hoping this video has made two things clear about the gods' powers. They are pretty incredible, but also in many ways limited. Gods often seek and are sometimes even created by powerful relics. Good examples of this are the numerous attempts at stealing the Stone of Jaws from each other, the same one that allegedly ascended V to godhood, and how Zamorak only acquired Zaros' power thanks to the Staff of Armadyl. It's in many ways no different than the power difference between a powerful mage with a goblin staff and one with Tumeken's shadow. They may be of equal strength when the playing field is leveled, but there's no question which one your average noob would worship as a god. Even the supposedly inviolable edicts of Guthix may actually be a little more shaky than it appears. During the quest Darkness of Hallowvale, it's revealed that many experts suspect the edicts may be more of a simple threat, or even at worst a complete bluff. It's unclear to those who studied them closely if breaking them would automatically invite retaliation, or if it's more like an order to the god's own followers to wake him up should the world's balance be upset again. And if it's the latter, then it's further unclear whether modern Guthixians would even have the means to pull him from his slumber. It's entirely possible that the required ritual has long been lost to history, or that those who do know it wouldn't actually have the power to even pull it off should they try. Therefore, it seems at least plausible that the edicts of Guthix are more of an angry threat than the impassable divine barrier we're led to believe it is. It seems Gielinor's deities were also always looking for followers to help carry out their will. The God Wars was not a long series of divine beings kicking down each other's doors. It was an unending flow of both willing and unwilling recruits being sent to die against other minions they had no personal quarrel with. I've already touched on how difficult it is to reconcile Saradomin's benevolent image with his actions during those 4,000 years, with so much of his efforts not being spent on protecting and guiding his followers, but on sending them on deadly assaults against Zamorakians or cruel missions to exterminate everything related to Zaros until no traces remained. This segues nicely into another topic of importance for our exploration of divinity on Gielinor: the gods' aspects. One would think a god would perfectly embody their aspects and be the perfect example of all the things they claim to stand for above all else. Yet it's surprisingly difficult to find a good example of this. Returning to the previous example of Saradomin, god of order and wisdom, it's difficult to see how his historical actions can be attributed to desire for order, or how the complete extermination of a realm and culture constitutes wisdom. Guthix, almost certainly the most powerful god on Gielinor, is supposed to represent balance, yet his actions to end the God Wars, while certainly having been great for the mortal species of the land, paint a slightly more complicated picture. Telling the other gods not to upset the balance again is one thing, but threatening to simply wipe out the entire world if they do hardly sounds like a balanced approach if you ask me. And neither does pushing Seren to sacrifice herself so an entire species wouldn't go extinct, especially considering the elves' goddess was one of the very few who wasn't trying to upset the balance in the first place. You may also have already noted that some gods share the same aspects. Tumeken and Ralos, for instance, are both considered gods of the sun, which feels a little silly. The whole idea of gods being associated with aspects is that they're supposed to be at the very top of what they represent. So riddle me this, wise old man. Do enough research on the gods, and a pattern quickly starts emerging. They are, above all else, interested in pursuing their own agendas. Saradomin created elite orders such as the Temple Knights and Justiciars who only answer to him, not because he wants them to spread wisdom and order, but to impose his own will. Guthix wants balance restored in the world not for the sake of its inhabitants, but for his own satisfaction. Otherwise he wouldn't threaten to just kill everyone, would he? Zamorak isn't a god of chaos and evil for the sake of chaos and evil themselves, but because spreading chaos and disregarding morality is what allows him to reach his ambitions more easily. Bandos wages endless war, as far as I can tell, because he's a psycho and his parents never gave him any validation growing up. It's in many ways ironic that many mortals see the worshipping of a god as a higher purpose in life, when arguably the best examples of benevolent deities were the ones who themselves saw the well-being of their worshippers as their own higher purpose. We've seen several examples of gods willingly surrendering their existence for the sake of what their peers only saw as pawns in their grand designs. Tumeken detonated himself to halt the Zarosian invasion of the Caridian desert. Seren shattered herself into pieces to sustain the elves' lives. If you believe there is nothing above godhood, this should at the very least give you pause for thought. The latter example is even more telling of the gods' selfishness when you consider that Guthix forced this impossible decision on Seren when she only sought peace and harmony for her people. And yet he thought it was perfectly fine for his supposedly beloved balance to allow freaking Amascut to remain on Gielinor, despite her quite literally referring to herself as the Devourer and making it her life mission to cause mass deaths so she can consume the souls of the deceased. Yeah, I'm sure banishing all the other gods and making her instantly become among the most powerful beings left anywhere on Gielinor carries no risk of upsetting the balance. Carry on, Mrs. the Devourer Esquire. Fine, we can finally answer the question. If you haven't noticed by now, I've so far avoided the very question at the heart of this video. What on Gielinor really are the gods of Gielinor? After a lot of research, all the evidence converges to one conclusion. The gods of Gielinor are gods because most people agree that they are. What do I mean by that? Gods are neither all-powerful nor divine in the traditional sense. They are not entities whose very nature is unknowable and transcendent. In fact, to put it bluntly, they are not gods due to their inherent superiority over common mortals, but because they are much more powerful than them through nothing more than the luck of the draw. Those we call gods are little more than adventurers whose magic levels are just capped at 50,000 rather than a measly 99. And one should be extremely careful not to confuse strength and might for righteousness and wisdom. True moral guidance is not about fanatically following one entity or idea at the expense of all others, but about instilling the necessary wisdom to navigate life's most difficult decisions through exemplary leadership, valuable experiences, and deep stories dripping with moral complexity. And there is no deeper story than that of every raid in OSRS, so you should watch my video about that to show your appreciation for this masterful transition. Also like, subscribe and comment to help me grow stronger than any of these fake gods, because unlike them, I value my followers. Oh, and become a channel member to financially support my work, get access to these videos 3 days early, and potentially add your name to this list of incredibly handsome people. Thank you, love you, see you next time, I'm gonna go play some more leagues.